In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, few tales burn as brightly or fall as catastrophically as that of Fulgrim, the Phoenician Primarch of the Third Legion. His story stands as perhaps the most tragic of all the Emperor's sons, a cautionary tale of how the pursuit of perfection can become the very path to damnation. Where other Primarchs fell to rage, pride, or despair, Fulgrim's corruption came through his greatest virtue turned vice, his relentless drive toward an impossible ideal. The galaxy of the 31st millennium was a realm where gods walked among mortals, where genetically crafted demigods led armies of transhuman warriors in a crusade to reclaim humanity's birthright among the stars. At the heart of this grand endeavor stood the Emperor of Mankind, a being of such immense psychic power and vision that he could reshape reality itself. Yet even this master of genecraft and war could not foresee how his most beautiful creation would become his most terrible enemy. Fulgrim's name once rang across the galaxy as a byword for excellence, beauty, and martial perfection. His legion, the Emperor's Children, stood as the exemplar of what the Adeptus Astartes could achieve when discipline, skill, and unwavering dedication were combined with the finest gene seed the Emperor could create. They were artists and warriors both, philosophers and killers, beings who sought to elevate warfare itself to an art form. In their purple and gold armor, they strode across battlefields like living sculptures, each movement calculated for maximum efficiency and aesthetic appeal. But perfection, as Fulgrim would learn too late, is a horizon that recedes with every step taken toward it. The closer one comes to that impossible ideal, the more apparent become the flaws that remain. And in a universe where the Chaos Gods wait in the warp, feeding on mortal emotion and ambition, such obsessive pursuit becomes a beacon that draws the attention of powers beyond mortal comprehension. The story of Fulgrim is not merely one of personal corruption, but a mirror held up to humanity itself. It asks uncomfortable questions about the nature of excellence, the price of ambition, and whether the pursuit of perfection is inherently noble or inherently damning. In Fulgrim's rise and fall, we see reflected our own struggles with pride, our own temptations to compromise our principles in service of a greater goal, our own capacity for self-deception when faced with uncomfortable truths about ourselves. Before we delve into this tale of glory turned to horror, of beauty transformed into abomination, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Lore of Hammer for more deep dives into the rich, complex universe of Warhammer 40,000. Your support helps us continue exploring these epic narratives that have captivated fans for decades. The Phoenician story begins not with his birth, but with the vision that created him. The Emperor, in his infinite wisdom and terrible foresight, crafted 20 Primarchs to serve as generals in his great crusade. Each was designed with specific traits, specific purposes, specific roles to play in the grand design of human expansion across the galaxy. Fulgrim was to be the perfectionist, the one who would show humanity what it could become when every flaw was eliminated, every weakness overcome, every aspect of existence refined to its ultimate expression. Yet the Chaos Gods, those ancient entities of the warp who had watched humanity's rise with growing hunger, would not allow the Emperor's plans to proceed unopposed. In their jealousy and malice, they scattered the infant Primarchs across the galaxy, casting them through the warp to distant worlds where they would grow up far from their father's guidance. Some landed on worlds that would forge them into the weapons the Emperor intended. Others found themselves in circumstances that would twist their development in ways both subtle and profound. Fulgrim's fate was to be both blessed and cursed, to find himself on a world that would nurture his perfectionist nature while simultaneously planting the seeds of his eventual corruption. The irony was exquisite in its cruelty, the very environment that made him the perfect Primarch would also make him the perfect target for the whispers of She Who Thirsts, the Chaos God Slaanesh, whose domain encompasses not just excess and hedonism, but the pursuit of perfection itself. Before the Phoenician could claim his destiny, his legion had already begun to carve its legend across the stars. The Third Legion, later to be known as the Emperor's Children, was among the first of the Adeptus Astartes legions to be founded during the early days of the Great Crusade. From their very inception, they were marked as special, chosen to bear gene seed that was considered the most stable and pure of all the Primarch lines. The Emperor himself took a personal interest in the Third Legion's development, overseeing their training and indoctrination with an attention to detail that was unusual even for him. Where other legions were forged in the crucible of necessity, shaped by the urgent demands of the expanding crusade, the Third Legion was crafted like a work of art. Every aspect of their creation was refined, perfected, elevated beyond the merely functional to something approaching the sublime. Their gene seed was a masterwork of biological engineering, free from the mutations and instabilities that plagued some of their brother legions. Where the Space Wolves carried the curse of the Wolfen, where the Blood Angels struggled with the Red Thirst, where the Imperial Fists bore the Pain Glove's legacy of stoicism through suffering, the Third Legion's genetic inheritance was unmarred by such complications. They were, in every measurable way, perfect specimens of what the Adeptus Astartes could become. This perfection, however, came with its own price. The Third Legion's gene seed was so refined, so precisely calibrated, that it could only be successfully implanted in candidates who met the most exacting standards. Where other legions could recruit from a broad population base, accepting candidates with minor flaws or imperfections that could be corrected through the transformation process, the Third Legion required near-perfect genetic compatibility from the start. The result was a legion that grew slowly, its ranks filled with warriors who were exceptional even by the standards of the Adeptus Astartes. Each battle brother was a work of art in his own right, possessed of not just superhuman physical capabilities, but also intellectual and aesthetic sensibilities that set them apart from their peers. They were scholars and warriors, artists and killers, beings who could compose poetry with the same skill they brought to the battlefield. Their early campaigns during the Great Crusade established patterns that would define the Legion for centuries to come. Where other legions might accept a Pyrrhic victory content to achieve their objectives regardless of the cost, the Third Legion sought to win with style, with elegance, with a perfection of execution that would serve as an example to all who witnessed it. They developed tactics that were as beautiful as they were effective, maneuvers that flowed like choreographed dances while delivering devastating military results. The Legion's culture began to develop around the concept of excellence in all things. A battle brother of the Third Legion was expected to master not just the arts of war, but also music, sculpture, poetry, philosophy, and any other discipline that might contribute to his overall perfection as a human being. They believed that true strength came not from specialization, but from the harmonious development of all aspects of the self. This philosophy extended to their equipment and appearance as well. The Third Legion's armor was maintained to standards that bordered on the obsessive, each piece polished to a mirror finish, every detail perfect. Their weapons were not just tools of war, but works of art, decorated with intricate engravings and precious metals that spoke to the warrior's aesthetic sensibilities as much as his martial prowess. Yet even in these early days, there were those who questioned whether such perfectionism was entirely healthy. Some observers noted that the Third Legion's pursuit of excellence sometimes came at the expense of practical considerations. They would spend hours perfecting a tactical maneuver that was already effective, seeking an impossible ideal of flawless execution that might never be achieved. They would delay an assault to ensure that their armor was properly polished, their formations perfectly aligned, their approach aesthetically pleasing as well as militarily sound. These concerns were largely dismissed by the Legion's leadership and by the Emperor himself. After all, the Third Legion's battle record was exemplary, their loyalty unquestioned, their effectiveness in combat beyond dispute. If they chose to pursue excellence with an intensity that others found excessive, surely that was a virtue rather than a flaw. In a galaxy where mediocrity meant death and failure meant the extinction of entire worlds, was it not better to have warriors who demanded perfection from themselves? The Legion's recruitment practices reflected their exacting standards. Potential candidates underwent trials that tested not just their physical capabilities and genetic compatibility, but also their aesthetic sensibilities, their intellectual capacity, their ability to appreciate and create beauty. Those who passed these trials were inducted into a brotherhood that valued excellence above all else, where the pursuit of perfection was not just encouraged but demanded. Training regimens were designed to develop not just the body and mind, but also the soul. Battle brothers learned to find beauty in violence, to see warfare as the ultimate art form where life and death hung in the balance of perfect execution. They studied the great military campaigns of history, not just for their tactical lessons, but for their aesthetic qualities, seeking to understand how the greatest generals had achieved victories that were as beautiful as they were decisive. The 3rd Legion's fortress monastery became a center of learning and culture, well as military might. Its halls were filled with works of art created by the Battle Brothers themselves, sculptures and paintings that captured the beauty they found in war and the perfection they sought in all things. Libraries contained not just tactical manuals and technical specifications, but also poetry, philosophy, and treatises on aesthetics that informed the Legion's unique approach to warfare. As the Great Crusade expanded and the 3rd Legion's reputation grew, they began to attract the attention of other imperial forces who sought to learn from their example. Delegations from other legions would visit to observe their training methods, their tactical innovations, their approach to the art of war. Some came away inspired, seeking to incorporate elements of the 3rd Legion's philosophy into their own practices. Others left disturbed by what they saw as an unhealthy obsession with perfection that bordered on the pathological. On the industrial world of Chemos, far from Terra's golden light, a star fell from the heavens carrying within it the future of an entire legion. The infant Primarch who would become known as Fulgrim crashed into a world that was dying, its resources depleted, its people struggling to survive in the ruins of a once great civilization. Yet from this desolation would emerge one of the most remarkable figures in the galaxy's history, a being whose very presence would transform not just his adoptive world, but the entire course of human expansion among the stars. Chemos had once been a jewel of human achievement, a world where art and industry flourished in perfect harmony. Its cities had been marvels of architecture and engineering, its people renowned throughout the sector for their craftsmanship and aesthetic sensibilities. But the age of strife had not been kind to this world of artists and makers. Cut off from interstellar trade, depleted of the raw materials that had fueled their industries, the people of Chemos had watched their civilization crumble around them. By the time Fulgrim arrived, Chemos was a shadow of its former glory. The great cities lay in ruins, their magnificent spires reduced to rubble and rust. The population had dwindled to a few scattered settlements, their inhabitants eking out a meager existence from the planet's exhausted mines and failing factories. Hope was a luxury that few could afford in a world where each day brought new evidence of inevitable decline. The infant Primarch was discovered by Kasparos Telmer, a factory overseer who had been working late into the night trying to coax a few more hours of operation from machinery that should have been replaced decades ago. The crash site was a crater of fused glass and twisted metal. At its center, a child who should have been dead but instead lay sleeping peacefully, unmarked by the violence of his arrival. Telmer, a man who had seen too much suffering to believe in miracles, nonetheless recognized that something extraordinary had occurred. Fulgrim's childhood on Chemos was marked by an almost supernatural ability to inspire those around him. Even as a young boy, he possessed a charisma and vision that drew people to him like moths to a flame. He saw the ruins of the great cities not as monuments to failure, but as challenges to be overcome, puzzles to be solved through the application of will and ingenuity. Where others saw only decay and despair, Fulgrim saw potential waiting to be unlocked. His adoptive father, Telmer, was a practical man who had learned to temper his expectations with the harsh realities of life on a dying world. Yet even he found himself believing in possibilities he had long since abandoned when Fulgrim spoke of rebuilding, of restoration, of returning Chemos to its former glory. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, his confidence unshakable, his vision so compelling that it seemed almost criminal not to believe in it. As Fulgrim grew, so did his influence over the people of Chemos. He began with small projects, organizing work crews to repair damaged machinery, coordinating efforts to clear debris from the ruined cities, establishing workshops where the old crafts could be taught to a new generation. Each success built upon the last, creating a momentum that seemed to feed on itself, transforming despair into hope and resignation into determination. The young Primarch's approach to reconstruction was as much about aesthetics as it was about functionality. He understood instinctively that people needed beauty as much as they needed shelter, that the human spirit required inspiration as much as it required sustenance. Under his guidance, the rebuilt structures of Chemos were not merely functional, but beautiful, incorporating artistic elements that spoke to the soul as well as serving practical purposes. Fulgrim's workshops became centers of learning and innovation, where the traditional crafts of Chemos were not just preserved, but elevated to new heights of excellence. He encouraged experimentation, pushing artisans to explore new techniques and materials, to seek perfection in their work not for its own sake, but as a means of honoring the legacy of their ancestors and building a better future for their children. The transformation of Chemos under Fulgrim's leadership was nothing short of miraculous. Within a few short years, the dying world began to bloom again. Factories that had stood silent for generations roared back to life, their production lines turning out goods that rivaled anything produced during the planet's golden age. The great cities rose from their ruins, their new architecture blending the best of the old traditions with innovations that pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Yet Fulgrim's greatest achievement was not the physical reconstruction of Chemos, but the spiritual renewal of its people. He had given them back their pride, their sense of purpose, their belief in the possibility of a better tomorrow. The craftsmen of Chemos once again took pride in their work, striving for levels of excellence that had been forgotten during the dark years of decline. Artists emerged from the shadows where they had hidden their talents, creating works that celebrated the rebirth of their world and a vision of the young leader who had made it possible. The Primarch's own development during these years was equally remarkable. He grew not just in physical stature, but in wisdom and capability, mastering every skill he encountered with an ease that bordered on the supernatural. He became a master craftsman, a brilliant engineer, a gifted artist, and an inspiring leader all at once. His hands could shape metal with the precision of a master sculptor. His mind could solve technical problems that had baffled generations of engineers, and his voice could move crowds to action with words that seemed to bypass rational thought and speak directly to the heart. But perhaps most importantly, Fulgrim developed an understanding of perfection that went beyond mere technical excellence. He learned that true perfection was not about eliminating all flaws, but about achieving a harmony between form and function, between beauty and utility, between the ideal and the practical. This philosophy would later define not just his own approach to leadership, but the entire culture of his legion. The people of Chemos began to see their young leader as something more than human, a figure of almost mythical proportions who had single-handedly saved their world from extinction. Stories spread of his incredible abilities, his impossible achievements, his seemingly supernatural insight into the nature of excellence and beauty. Some whispered that he was a gift from the gods, sent to restore Chemos to its rightful place among the great worlds of human civilization. Fulgrim himself was aware of his extraordinary nature, but chose to focus on the work at hand, rather than dwelling on questions of his origins or destiny. He threw himself into the task of rebuilding Chemos with an intensity that was both inspiring and slightly unsettling to those who worked closely with him. He seemed to require little sleep, little rest, little of the ordinary human comforts that sustained others. His energy was inexhaustible, his focus absolute, his commitment to excellence unwavering. As Chemos continued its remarkable transformation, Fulgrim began to look beyond the borders of his adoptive world. He studied the ancient records, learning about the great human civilization that had once spanned the galaxy, the golden age that had been lost during the Age of Strife. He dreamed of reconnecting with that larger human community, of sharing the lessons learned on Chemos with other worlds that might benefit from his experience and vision. The young Primarch's ambitions were not born of ego or a desire for personal glory, but from a genuine belief that the principles that had saved Chemos could be applied on a galactic scale. He envisioned a human civilization where every world was a masterpiece, where every citizen could take pride in their achievements, where excellence and beauty were not luxuries for the elite but birthrights for all humanity. These dreams would soon become reality in ways that Fulgrim could never have anticipated. For even as he worked to perfect his adoptive world, forces beyond his knowledge or understanding were moving to bring him into contact with his true father and his ultimate destiny. The Emperor of Mankind, master of genecraft and architect of the Great Crusade, was searching for his lost sons, and the beacon of excellence that Chemos had become under Fulgrim's leadership was beginning to attract attention from across the galaxy. The stage was set for a reunion that would change not just Fulgrim's life, but the entire course of human history. The Phoenician had risen from the ashes of a dying world, transforming both himself and his people through the pursuit of perfection. Soon, he would discover that his true purpose lay not in the salvation of a single world, but in the conquest of the galaxy itself, leading armies of transhuman warriors in a crusade to reclaim humanity's birthright among the stars. The day the Emperor came to Chemos marked the end of one chapter in Fulgrim's life and the beginning of another that would echo through eternity. The arrival of the Master of Mankind was heralded not by fanfare or ceremony, but by a simple recognition between father and son that transcended words, transcended explanation, transcended the very boundaries of normal human experience. In that moment of first contact, two beings of immense power and vision looked upon each other and knew, with absolute certainty, that destiny had finally brought them together. The Emperor's fleet had been drawn to Chemos by reports of the world's remarkable transformation, stories that had spread through the surrounding systems like ripples in a pond. Traders spoke of a planet reborn, of cities that gleamed like jewels against the darkness of space, of people who had rediscovered pride in their work and beauty in their lives. Such tales were rare in a galaxy still scarred by the age of strife, and the Emperor recognized in them the signature of one of his lost sons. When the golden figure of the Emperor first set foot on Chemos, Fulgrim was waiting for him. The Primarch had felt something stirring in his soul for days before the arrival, a sense of anticipation and completion that he could not fully explain. As the two figures approached each other across the landing field surrounded by the architectural marvels that Fulgrim had helped create, there was a moment of perfect silence, as if the entire world held its breath in recognition of the historic significance of this meeting. The Emperor spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had commanded the loyalty of billions and the power that had shaped the very course of human evolution. Yet when he addressed Fulgrim, there was something more than imperial majesty in his tone, something that spoke to the bond between creator and creation, between father and son. He acknowledged not just Fulgrim's identity as a Primarch, but his achievements on Chemos, recognizing in the world's transformation the same vision of human excellence that drove the Great Crusade itself. Fulgrim's response was characteristic of the man he had become during his years on Chemos. He did not prostrate himself before the Emperor or overwhelm him with protestations of loyalty and devotion. Instead, he spoke as one leader to another, acknowledging the Emperor's authority while maintaining the dignity and self-respect that had made him such an effective ruler of his adoptive world. He offered his service not as a supplicant seeking favor, but as a partner ready to contribute to a shared vision of human greatness. The Emperor was impressed not just by Fulgrim's obvious capabilities, but by the maturity and wisdom he had developed during his years of exile. Where some of the other Primarchs had been shaped by conflict and hardship into weapons of war, Fulgrim had been forged by responsibility and achievement into something more complex and nuanced. He was a warrior, certainly, but he was also a builder, a creator, a leader who understood that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the capacity to inspire and elevate others. The reunion between father and son was followed by a tour of Chemos that served as both celebration and evaluation. The Emperor walked through the rebuilt cities, examined the restored factories, met with the craftsmen and artists who had flourished under Fulgrim's leadership. At every turn, he found evidence of the same principles that guided his own vision for humanity: the pursuit of excellence, the elevation of the human spirit, the belief that mortals could achieve greatness when properly led and inspired. The people of Chemos responded to the Emperor's presence with a mixture of awe and pride. They had always known that their leader was extraordinary, but seeing him acknowledged by this golden figure of obvious power and authority confirmed what many had long suspected: that Fulgrim was indeed something more than human, a being destined for greatness on a scale that transcended any single world. For Fulgrim himself, the meeting with the Emperor was both revelation and confirmation. The questions about his origins that had haunted him since childhood were finally answered, but more importantly, he discovered that his deepest instincts about his purpose and destiny had been correct. He was indeed meant for something greater than the governance of a single world, no matter how successfully he had transformed it. The Emperor explained the Great Crusade, the vast undertaking to reunite humanity under a single banner and reclaim the galaxy from the darkness that had consumed it during the Age of Strife. He spoke of the other Primarchs, Fulgrim's brothers, who were already leading their legions in this grand endeavor, each contributing their unique talents and perspectives to the common cause. He described the Third Legion, the Emperor's children, who had been waiting for their Primarch to claim his rightful place at their head. The prospect of leading a legion of transhuman warriors in a galactic crusade appealed to every aspect of Fulgrim's nature. Here was a canvas vast enough for his ambitions, a challenge worthy of his capabilities, an opportunity to apply the lessons learned on Chemos on a scale that could transform the entire galaxy. The pursuit of perfection that had driven him to rebuild his adoptive world could now be directed toward the elevation of all humanity. Yet Fulgrim was not so eager for glory that he abandoned his responsibilities to Chemos. He spent considerable time ensuring that the world's continued prosperity would not depend on his personal presence, establishing institutions and training successors who could carry on his work in his absence. This attention to detail and concern for those he was leaving behind impressed the Emperor and confirmed his assessment of Fulgrim's character. The transition from planetary ruler to legion commander was handled with the same meticulous care that Fulgrim brought to all his endeavors. He studied the history and traditions of the Third Legion, learning about their culture, their achievements, their unique approach to warfare. He met with their senior officers, not as a conqueror imposing his will, but as a leader seeking to understand and build upon what had already been accomplished. The Emperor's children had developed their own interpretation of the pursuit of perfection during the years they had fought without their Primarch. They had become masters of precision warfare, specialists in operations that required not just courage and skill, but also aesthetic sensibility and intellectual sophistication. Their battle record was exemplary, their loyalty unquestioned, their dedication to excellence absolute. Fulgrim found in his legion a reflection of his own values and aspirations, warriors who understood that true strength came not from brute force, but from the harmonious development of all aspects of the self. They were artists and philosophers as well as killers, beings who sought to elevate warfare itself to an art form. In them, he saw the potential to create something unprecedented in the galaxy's history, a military force that could serve as an example of human excellence in all its forms. The formal ceremony in which Fulgrim assumed command of the Third Legion was a masterpiece of pageantry and symbolism. The Emperor himself presided over the event, lending his authority to the transition while also demonstrating his confidence in his son's abilities. The Legion's battle standards were presented to their new Primarch, along with the ancient weapons and artifacts that had been held in trust for his eventual arrival. Under Fulgrim's leadership, the Third Legion underwent a transformation that was as profound as it was rapid. The Phoenician brought to his warriors not just tactical innovation and strategic vision, but a philosophy of excellence that permeated every aspect of their existence. Where once they had been merely exceptional soldiers, they now became something approaching living works of art, warriors whose every action was calculated to achieve not just military effectiveness, but aesthetic perfection. The changes began with the Legion's approach to training and preparation. Fulgrim instituted new regiments that went far beyond the physical conditioning and tactical drills that were standard among the Adeptus Astartes. His warriors were required to master multiple disciplines, to develop their minds and spirits as well as their bodies, to become complete beings rather than mere specialists in violence. They studied music and poetry, sculpture and painting, philosophy and mathematics, all in service of the belief that true perfection could only be achieved through the harmonious development of all human faculties. This holistic approach to warrior development was revolutionary even by the standards of the Great Crusade. Other legions might produce soldiers who were supremely effective in their chosen specializations, but the Emperor's children under Fulgrim's guidance became something unprecedented. Warriors who could appreciate beauty while creating destruction, who could compose sonnets between battles and find mathematical elegance in the arc of a bolt or shell. The legion's equipment and appearance reflected this new philosophy. Fulgrim personally oversaw the redesign of their armor, weapons, and vehicles, ensuring that every piece of war gear was not just functional but beautiful. The purple and gold livery of the Emperor's children became a work of art in itself. Each suit of power armor a unique masterpiece that reflected the individual warrior's personality and achievements while maintaining the overall aesthetic unity of the Legion. Their weapons received similar attention. Bolters were decorated with intricate engravings that told the stories of their wielders' greatest victories. Chainswords were balanced not just for maximum effectiveness, but for the graceful arcs they would trace through the air during combat. Even their ammunition was crafted with an attention to detail that bordered on the obsessive, each bolt shell a small work of art that would deliver death with style and precision. The Legion's tactical doctrine evolved to reflect their new emphasis on perfection in all things. Where other forces might accept a victory achieved through overwhelming firepower or numerical superiority, the Emperor's children sought to win through superior skill, coordination, and execution. They developed new formations and maneuvers that were as beautiful to observe as they were devastating to experience, turning the battlefield into a stage where the art of war could be performed at its highest level. Fulgrim's influence extended beyond mere military matters to encompass the entire culture of the Legion. He encouraged his warriors to see themselves not just as soldiers, but as exemplars of human potential, living demonstrations of what mortals could achieve when they dedicated themselves to the pursuit of excellence. This sense of mission and purpose gave the Emperor's children a confidence and esprit de corps that was remarkable even among the Adeptus Astartes. The Primarch himself served as the ultimate example of the ideals he preached. He was not content to merely command from a distance, but threw himself into every aspect of the Legion's activities with an intensity that was both inspiring and slightly unsettling. He could be found in the training halls perfecting new combat techniques, in the workshops crafting new weapons and equipment, in the libraries studying ancient texts on military theory and aesthetic philosophy. His personal combat style became legendary throughout the Legion and beyond. Fulgrim fought with a grace and elegance that transformed violence into a form of deadly ballet. His movements were economical yet beautiful, each strike perfectly calculated for maximum effect while maintaining an aesthetic quality that was almost hypnotic to observe. Enemies found themselves mesmerized by the sheer artistry of his technique even as they died beneath his blade. The Emperor's children's first major campaign under Fulgrim's direct leadership was against the Laer, a Xenos species that had established a significant presence in several systems along the expanding frontier of the Great Crusade. The campaign would prove to be a defining moment for the Legion, demonstrating their new capabilities while also setting in motion events that would have far-reaching consequences for their future. The Laer were a sophisticated enemy, possessed of advanced technology and a deep understanding of both warfare and aesthetics. Their cities were marvels of alien architecture, their weapons works of art as well as instruments of destruction. Their warriors trained in combat techniques that emphasized grace and beauty as much as lethality. In many ways, they represented a dark mirror of what the Emperor's children were striving to become. Fulgrim approached the campaign with characteristic thoroughness, studying the enemy's culture and capabilities with the same intensity he brought to all his endeavors. He recognized in the Laer a worthy opponent, beings who shared his appreciation for excellence and beauty even if they applied these values in service of goals that were antithetical to human interests. The prospect of facing such an enemy excited him in ways that more straightforward military challenges could not. The campaign itself was a masterpiece of military art, showcasing the Emperor's Children's new capabilities and tactical innovations. They struck with precision and elegance, their attacks coordinated with a perfection that left their enemies reeling. Each battle was planned and executed with an attention to detail that ensured not just victory, but victory achieved in the most aesthetically pleasing manner possible. Fulgrim's personal performance during the campaign was nothing short of spectacular. He led from the front, his presence on the battlefield inspiring his warriors to heights of achievement that surprised even themselves. His tactical genius was matched by his personal courage and skill, and his ability to find beauty in the midst of violence became a source of legend among his followers. The successful conclusion of the Laer campaign established the Emperor's Children as one of the premier legions of the Great Crusade. Their reputation for excellence and their unique approach to warfare attracted attention from across the galaxy, with other Imperial forces seeking to learn from their example. Fulgrim himself was recognized as one of the most gifted of the Primarchs, a leader whose vision and capabilities marked him as destined for greatness. Yet even in the moment of triumph, there were those who noticed subtle changes in the Legion's character. The pursuit of perfection that had once been a noble goal was beginning to take on an edge of obsession that some found troubling. The Emperor's Children's standards were becoming so exacting that they sometimes seemed to value aesthetic considerations over practical military necessities. Their confidence was beginning to shade into arrogance, their pride in their achievements starting to blind them to their own limitations. These concerns were largely dismissed by the Legion's leadership and by Fulgrim himself. After all, their battle record was exemplary, their loyalty to the Emperor unquestioned, their effectiveness in combat beyond dispute. If they chose to pursue excellence with an intensity that others found excessive, surely that was a virtue rather than a flaw. In a galaxy where mediocrity meant death and failure meant the extinction of entire worlds, was it not better to have warriors who demanded perfection from themselves and from those around them? Among the 20 Primarchs scattered across the galaxy by the machinations of chaos, few bonds would prove as deep or as tragically significant as the friendship that developed between Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus. Primarch of the Iron Hands, their relationship represented one of the Great Crusade's most poignant examples of brotherhood transcending the vast differences in temperament and philosophy that might otherwise have kept such beings apart. Where Fulgrim embodied the pursuit of aesthetic perfection and cultural refinement, Ferrus Manus represented the virtues of strength, endurance, and technological mastery. Yet in their differences, they found a complementary bond that enriched both their legions and their own understanding of what it meant to be a Primarch. The first meeting between Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus occurred during the early years of the Great Crusade, when their respective legions were assigned to a joint campaign against a particularly stubborn Auk Empire that had established itself across multiple systems. The initial encounter between the two Primarchs was marked by a mutual wariness that quickly gave way to genuine respect and, eventually, deep friendship. Ferrus Manus, known as the Gorgon for his fearsome appearance and implacable nature, was everything that Fulgrim was not. Where the Phoenician was beautiful and graceful, Ferrus was scarred and brutal. Where Fulgrim sought perfection through refinement and elevation, Ferrus pursued it through strength and endurance. His hands, transformed by his contact with the living metal of Medusa into instruments of incredible power, could shape adamantium as easily as clay, yet they bore none of the aesthetic sensibility that guided Fulgrim's own creations. The Iron Hands Legion reflected their Primarch's character, every aspect of their organization and doctrine. They were pragmatists who valued function over form, warriors who saw beauty in the efficient operation of machinery rather than in artistic expression. Their approach to warfare was direct and uncompromising, relying on overwhelming firepower and technological superiority to crush their enemies, rather than the elegant tactics and aesthetic considerations that characterized the Emperor's children. Yet despite these fundamental differences, or perhaps because of them, Fulgrim found himself drawn to his brother Primarch in ways that surprised even himself. In Ferrus Manus, he saw qualities that he recognized as essential complements to his own nature. The Gorgon's unwavering strength provided a foundation upon which Fulgrim's more ethereal pursuits could be built. His practical wisdom served as a counterbalance to the Phoenicians' sometimes excessive idealism. The joint campaign against the Ox provided numerous opportunities for the two Primarchs to observe each other in action and to appreciate the unique strengths that each brought to the art of war. Fulgrim's tactical brilliance and inspirational leadership proved perfectly complementary to Ferrus Manus' strategic patience and technological expertise. Where the Emperor's children excelled at rapid, precise strikes that shattered enemy morale, the Iron Hands provided the steady, implacable advance that consolidated gains and prevented enemy recovery. Their personal relationship deepened through countless hours spent in discussion and debate during the campaign's quieter moments. Fulgrim would speak passionately about his vision of human perfection, his belief that mortals could transcend their limitations through dedication to excellence in all its forms. Ferrus Manus would respond with his own philosophy, arguing that true strength came not from the pursuit of impossible ideals, but from the acceptance and mastery of harsh realities. These philosophical differences never became sources of conflict between them, but rather opportunities for mutual enrichment and growth. Fulgrim learned from his brother the value of pragmatism and the importance of building upon solid foundations rather than chasing ephemeral dreams. Ferrus Manus, in turn, began to appreciate the role that inspiration and beauty could play in motivating mortals to achieve greatness beyond their apparent limitations. The friendship between the two Primarchs extended beyond mere intellectual exchange to encompass genuine personal affection and mutual support. They began to seek each other's company during the brief respites between campaigns, sharing not just strategic discussions, but also more personal conversations about their experiences, their hopes, and their concerns about the future of the Great Crusade. Fulgrim introduced Ferrus Manus to the artistic traditions of Chemos, sharing with him the sculptures and paintings that had emerged from his adoptive world's cultural renaissance. The Gorgon, initially skeptical of such pursuits, gradually came to appreciate the skill and dedication required to create works of lasting beauty. He began to see parallels between the artist's pursuit of aesthetic perfection and his own quest for technological mastery. Ferrus Manus, in return, shared with Fulgrim the secrets of Medusa's forged craft, demonstrating the techniques that had allowed his people to create weapons and armor of unparalleled quality. The Phoenician was fascinated by the marriage of artistry and functionality that characterized the best examples of Iron Hands craftsmanship, recognizing in them a different but equally valid approach to the pursuit of perfection. Their collaboration extended to their legions as well, with the Emperor's children and Iron Hands developing joint training exercises and tactical doctrines that combined their respective strengths. Warriors from both legions learned to appreciate the value of their brothers' approaches, with some Emperor's children developing a greater appreciation for technological mastery, while some Iron Hands began to incorporate aesthetic considerations into their own work. The bond between Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus became legendary throughout the Great Crusade, serving as an example of how the Primarchs could overcome their differences to work together in service of the Emperor's vision. Their friendship was seen as a symbol of the unity that the Great Crusade sought to achieve, proof that beings of vastly different temperaments and philosophies could find common ground in their shared commitment to human excellence. Other Primarchs took note of this relationship and its effects on both legions. Some, like Horus and Sanguinius, saw it as a model for their own interactions with their brothers. Others, like Perturabo and Mortarion, viewed it with a mixture of envy and skepticism, questioning whether such close bonds between Primarchs might ultimately prove more harmful than beneficial to the overall unity of the Crusade. The Emperor himself observed the friendship between Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus with approval, recognizing in it the kind of cooperation and mutual support that would be essential for the success of his grand design. He encouraged their collaboration while being careful not to interfere with the natural development of their relationship, understanding that the bonds between his sons were too important to be manipulated or artificially directed. As the Great Crusade progressed and new challenges emerged, the friendship between Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus continued to deepen and evolve. They supported each other through difficult campaigns, celebrated each other's victories, and provided counsel during moments of doubt or uncertainty. Their relationship became a source of strength for both Primarchs, a reminder that even beings of their extraordinary capabilities could benefit from the support and understanding of a true friend. Yet even as their friendship flourished, subtle changes were beginning to affect both Primarchs and their legions. The pursuit of perfection that had once been a noble goal was starting to take on different meanings for each of them. Fulgrim's quest for aesthetic and cultural excellence was beginning to shade into something more obsessive and potentially dangerous. Ferrus Manus' emphasis on strength and technological mastery was leading him toward an increasingly harsh and unforgiving worldview. These changes were gradual and largely unnoticed by the Primarchs themselves, masked as they were by the continued success of their campaigns and the apparent strength of their friendship. Yet they represented the first stirrings of the forces that would eventually tear the galaxy apart, the subtle corruptions and philosophical divergences that would transform the Great Crusade from a mission of unity into a war of brother against brother. The relationship between Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus would ultimately become one of the most tragic casualties of the Horus Heresy, a friendship destroyed not by external enemies, but by the very qualities that had once made it so strong. The pursuit of perfection that had brought them together would eventually drive them apart, as each Primarch's interpretation of that ideal led him down a path that the other could not follow. The campaign against the Laer began as what appeared to be a routine compliance action, another step in the Great Crusade's inexorable advance across the galaxy. The Xenos species had established a significant presence across several worlds in a strategically important system, their advanced technology and sophisticated military organization making them a threat that required the attention of a full Astartes legion. For Fulgrim and the Emperor's children, it represented an opportunity to demonstrate their tactical innovations and pursuit of military perfection against a worthy opponent. The Laer themselves were unlike any enemy the Emperor's children had previously encountered. They were a species that had achieved a level of technological and cultural sophistication that rivaled humanity's greatest achievements, yet they had applied their capabilities in ways that were fundamentally alien to human understanding. Their cities were marvels of architecture that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Their weapons combined devastating effectiveness with an aesthetic sensibility that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. What made the Laer particularly dangerous was not just their military capabilities, but their philosophy. Like the Emperor's children, they were devoted to the pursuit of perfection, but their interpretation of that ideal had led them down paths that humanity would find abhorrent. They had embraced excess and sensation as means to transcendence, pushing the boundaries of experience beyond what mortal minds were meant to endure. Their culture celebrated not just excellence, but extremity, not just achievement, but the violation of natural limits. Fulgrim approached the campaign with his characteristic thoroughness and attention to detail. He studied the Laer's military organization, their technological capabilities, their cultural practices, seeking to understand not just how to defeat them, but how to do so in a manner that would serve as a demonstration of human superiority. The prospect of facing an enemy that shared his appreciation for perfection, even if they had corrupted that ideal, excited him in ways that more straightforward military challenges could not. The initial phases of the campaign proceeded according to plan, with the Emperor's children demonstrating their tactical superiority through a series of precisely executed operations that systematically dismantled the Laer's defensive positions. Each battle was a masterpiece of military art, showcasing the Legion's unique combination of aesthetic sensibility and lethal effectiveness. Fulgrim himself led many of the assaults, his presence on the battlefield inspiring his warriors to heights of achievement that surprised even themselves. Yet as the campaign progressed, subtle changes began to manifest within the Legion. The Laer's approach to warfare, with its emphasis on sensation and extremity, began to influence the Emperor's children in ways that were initially too subtle to be noticed. Warriors who had once been content with achieving tactical objectives began to seek more intense experiences, more extreme challenges, more perfect expressions of their martial capabilities. The turning point came during the assault on the Laer's primary temple fortress, a structure that combined military functionality with religious significance in ways that defied easy categorization. The building itself was a work of art that seemed to pulse with its own inner life, its walls decorated with carvings and sculptures that depicted scenes of transcendence and transformation that were both beautiful and deeply disturbing. It was within this temple that Fulgrim encountered the artifact that would seal his fate and that of his entire legion. The Laer blade, as it came to be known, was a weapon of such exquisite craftsmanship that it seemed to embody everything the Primarch had ever sought in terms of aesthetic perfection and functional excellence. Its edge was sharper than any weapon he had ever seen, its balance perfect, its decoration a masterwork of alien artistry that spoke to something deep within his soul. The blade called to Fulgrim in ways that transcended mere appreciation for fine craftsmanship. When he first laid eyes upon it, he felt a compulsion that was almost physical in its intensity, a need to possess and wield this perfect weapon that overrode all other considerations. The rational part of his mind recognized that taking trophies from Xeno's temples was potentially dangerous, that alien artifacts might carry unknown risks or corruptions. Yet the desire to claim the blade was so overwhelming that such concerns seemed trivial by comparison. When Fulgrim first grasped the weapon, he experienced a moment of transcendent clarity that seemed to reveal new possibilities for achieving the perfection he had always sought. The blade felt like an extension of his own body, responding to his will with a precision and grace that surpassed even his considerable natural abilities. In that moment, he believed he had found the key to unlocking new levels of excellence, new heights of achievement that had previously been beyond his reach. The immediate effects of claiming the blade were subtle but significant. Fulgrim's already formidable combat abilities seemed to increase, his movements becoming even more graceful and deadly than before. His tactical insights became sharper, his ability to inspire his followers more pronounced. To his warriors and officers, it appeared that their Primarch had simply reached a new level of perfection, achieving capabilities that confirmed their belief in his extraordinary nature. Yet beneath these apparent improvements, more troubling changes were beginning to manifest. Fulgrim's pursuit of perfection, once tempered by wisdom and consideration for others, began to take on an edge of obsession that was both intense and increasingly divorced from practical considerations. He became more demanding of his followers, less tolerant of anything that fell short of his exacting standards, more willing to sacrifice practical concerns in favor of aesthetic considerations. The blade itself seemed to whisper to him during quiet moments, offering insights and suggestions that appeared to come from his own enhanced understanding, but which actually originated from sources far more sinister. These whispers spoke of new ways to achieve perfection, of experiences and sensations that could elevate him beyond the limitations that constrained lesser beings, of possibilities that lay just beyond the boundaries of conventional morality and wisdom. The completion of the Laer campaign was celebrated as another triumph for the Emperor's children, a demonstration of their tactical superiority and commitment to excellence that added to their already impressive reputation. The systematic destruction of the Xeno's forces had been achieved with a precision and artistry that served as an example to other Imperial forces, proof that warfare could be elevated to an art form when conducted by warriors dedicated to perfection. Yet for those who knew Fulgrim well, there were subtle signs that something had changed during the campaign. His conversations became more intense, his focus more narrow, his pursuit of perfection more consuming. He spoke increasingly of transcendence and transformation, of the need to push beyond conventional limitations in order to achieve true greatness. These changes were gradual enough that they could be attributed to the natural evolution of a great leader's thinking, but they represented the first visible signs of a corruption that would eventually consume not just the Primarch, but his entire legion. The Laer blade had introduced into Fulgrim's soul a poison that was all the more dangerous because it masqueraded as enlightenment. The weapon was not merely a tool, but a conduit, a means by which the Chaos God Slaanesh could begin to exert influence over one of the Emperor's most gifted sons. The corruption it carried was subtle and seductive, appealing to Fulgrim's greatest strengths and turning them into weaknesses, transforming his noble pursuit of perfection into an obsession that would ultimately damn him and all who followed him. The corruption that had taken root in Fulgrim's soul during the Laer campaign did not manifest itself immediately as open rebellion or obvious heresy. Instead, it worked like a slow poison, gradually altering his perceptions and priorities in ways that seemed, on the surface, to be natural extensions of his existing beliefs and ambitions. The pursuit of perfection that had always driven him became more intense, more consuming, more divorced from the practical considerations that had once tempered his idealism. The changes began with subtle shifts in the Legion's culture and practices. Training regimens that had once emphasized the harmonious development of mind, body, and spirit began to focus more heavily on pushing individual warriors beyond their apparent limitations, seeking to achieve new heights of capability regardless of the cost. The aesthetic considerations that had always been important to the Emperor's children became more elaborate and extreme, with warriors spending increasing amounts of time and resources on the decoration and modification of their equipment and appearance. Fulgrim himself became the primary driver of these changes, though he was largely unaware of the external influence that was shaping his thoughts and decisions. The Laer blade, which he now carried constantly, seemed to enhance his natural charisma and insight, making his words more compelling and his vision more seductive to those who served under him. When he spoke of the need to transcend conventional limitations, to seek perfection beyond the boundaries that constrained lesser beings, his followers found themselves unable to resist the appeal of his arguments. The Primarch's relationship with his brother Ferrus Manus began to show signs of strain as the corruption took hold. Where once their philosophical differences had been sources of mutual enrichment and friendly debate, they now became points of genuine disagreement and growing tension. Fulgrim found himself increasingly impatient with what he saw as the Gorgon's rigid adherence to conventional thinking, his unwillingness to embrace new possibilities for achieving greatness. Their conversations, once characterized by mutual respect and genuine affection, began to take on an edge of condescension on Fulgrim's part and concern on Ferrus Manus's. The Iron Hand Primarch could sense that something had changed in his brother, though he could not identify the source of his unease. Fulgrim's pursuit of perfection, which had once been inspiring in its nobility and dedication, now seemed to carry undertones of obsession and extremity that troubled the more pragmatic Primarch. The Emperor's children's approach to warfare began to evolve in ways that reflected their Primarch's changing priorities. Where once they had sought to achieve victory through superior skill and tactical excellence, they now began to pursue more extreme and elaborate methods of defeating their enemies. Battles became opportunities for artistic expression as much as military objectives, with the Legion sometimes accepting unnecessary risks or casualties in order to achieve victories that were aesthetically pleasing as well as strategically sound. These changes did not go entirely unnoticed by other Imperial forces, though they were generally attributed to the natural evolution of the Legion's unique culture rather than any fundamental corruption. The Emperor's children had always been known for their pursuit of excellence and their aesthetic sensibilities, so their increasing emphasis on these qualities seemed like a logical development rather than a cause for concern. Fulgrim's personal behavior also began to show subtle but significant changes. His already considerable pride in his achievements and those of his legion became more pronounced, shading into an arrogance that was both more obvious and more off-putting to those who interacted with him. He became less tolerant of criticism or suggestions that his methods might be flawed, more convinced of his own superiority and the righteousness of his vision. The Primarch's pursuit of new experiences and sensations, once limited to the aesthetic and intellectual realms, began to expand into areas that were more questionable and potentially dangerous. He sought out increasingly exotic forms of art and music, experiences that pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable even by the relatively liberal standards of the Emperor's children. His personal chambers became filled with artifacts and artworks that were beautiful but disturbing, creations that seemed to celebrate excess and extremity as much as excellence and refinement. The influence of the Laer blade continued to grow stronger with each passing day, its whispers becoming more frequent and more compelling. The weapon seemed to feed on Fulgrim's ambitions and desires, amplifying them while subtly redirecting them toward goals that served the interests of powers he did not yet recognize or understand. What he perceived as his own enhanced insight and growing wisdom was actually the gradual erosion of his moral foundations and the corruption of his noble ideals. The Primarch began to question aspects of the Great Crusade that he had previously accepted without reservation. The Emperor's vision of human unity and expansion, once the driving force behind all his actions, began to seem limited and constraining to his expanding consciousness. He found himself wondering whether the rigid structures and conservative thinking that characterized the Imperium might actually be obstacles to achieving the true perfection that humanity was capable of reaching. These doubts were carefully nurtured by the malevolent intelligence that spoke to him through the blade, though Fulgrim remained unaware of the external source of these thoughts. The corruption was subtle enough that he believed these new insights were the product of his own intellectual and spiritual development, the natural result of his growing understanding of the universe and his place within it. The Emperor's children began to attract the attention of other forces within the galaxy that were aligned with the powers of chaos, though these contacts were initially so subtle that they went unrecognized for what they were. Cults and secret societies that worshipped the dark gods began to see in the Legion's evolving philosophy and practices something that resonated with their own beliefs and objectives. They began to make contact through intermediaries and front organizations, offering knowledge and resources that seemed to support the Legion's pursuit of perfection. Fulgrim's growing isolation from his brother Primarchs became more pronounced as his corruption deepened. Where once he had sought out their company and valued their counsel, he now found their perspectives increasingly irrelevant to his own evolving understanding of what was truly important. He began to see them as limited by their adherence to conventional thinking, unable to appreciate the revolutionary insights that were transforming his own consciousness. The relationship with Ferrus Manus, once the strongest bond in Fulgrim's life, became increasingly strained as the two Primarchs found themselves unable to bridge the growing philosophical gulf between them. The Gorgon's attempts to express his concerns about the direction his brother was taking were met with dismissal and condescension, while Fulgrim's efforts to share his new insights were received with suspicion and alarm. The corruption that was consuming Fulgrim began to manifest in more obvious ways as it gained strength. His physical appearance, once the epitome of human perfection, began to show subtle changes that reflected the influence of the warp upon his soul. His beauty became more pronounced, but also more unsettling, taking on qualities that were simultaneously attractive and disturbing to those who looked upon him. The Emperor's children's recruitment and training practices began to evolve in ways that reflected their changing priorities. New candidates were selected not just for their genetic compatibility and martial potential, but also for their aesthetic sensibilities and their willingness to embrace extreme experiences in pursuit of perfection. The indoctrination process became more intense and more focused on breaking down conventional moral and ethical constraints that were seen as obstacles to true excellence. The Legion's relationship with other Imperial forces began to show signs of strain as their behavior became more extreme and their priorities more divorced from conventional military objectives. Complaints began to reach the higher levels of the Imperial hierarchy about the Emperor's children's methods and their apparent disregard for established protocols and procedures. These concerns were generally dismissed or explained away, but they represented the first signs that the Legion's corruption was becoming visible to outside observers. Fulgrim himself remained largely oblivious to the true nature of the changes that were occurring within himself and his Legion. The corruption was so subtle and so perfectly tailored to his existing beliefs and ambitions that he perceived it as enlightenment rather than damnation. He believed that he was achieving new levels of understanding and capability, that he was leading his followers toward a form of perfection that transcended anything that had been achieved before. The stage was being set for the great betrayal that would tear the galaxy apart, though none of the participants yet understood the roles they were destined to play. The seeds of heresy that had been planted during the Laer campaign were beginning to sprout, sending out tendrils of corruption that would eventually entangle not just the Emperor's children, but many other forces within the Imperium. The pursuit of perfection that had once been Fulgrim's greatest virtue was becoming the instrument of his damnation, and through him, the damnation of countless others who had trusted in his vision and followed his lead. The whispers of the blade grew stronger with each passing day, promising revelations and transformations that would elevate Fulgrim beyond the limitations of his current existence. The Chaos God Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure and Perfection, was slowly but surely claiming one of the Emperor's most gifted sons, turning his noble ambitions into instruments of corruption and his pursuit of excellence into a path toward ultimate damnation. The Isstvan system would become synonymous with treachery and betrayal, the place where the Great Crusade died and the Horus Heresy was truly born. For Fulgrim and the Emperor's children, it represented the point of no return, the moment when their gradual corruption finally manifested as open rebellion against the Emperor and everything they had once sworn to protect. The events that unfolded on the black sands of Isstvan V would forever stain the Legion's honor and transform them from loyal servants of the Imperium into willing agents of chaos. The path to Isstvan began with Horus Lupercal's own fall to chaos and his decision to turn the Great Crusade against itself. The War Master, once the Emperor's most trusted son and the architect of humanity's greatest victories, had been corrupted by the same dark powers that were slowly claiming Fulgrim. When Horus began to reach out to his brother Primarchs, seeking allies for his planned rebellion, he found in the Phoenician a mind already prepared to embrace radical change and reject the constraints of conventional loyalty. The meeting between Horus and Fulgrim that sealed the Emperor's children's fate took place in secret, away from the eyes of those who might have recognized the true nature of what was being discussed. To Fulgrim, Horus's arguments seemed to be logical extensions of his own evolving philosophy, appeals to pursue perfection and transcendence that resonated with the corruption that had already taken root in his soul. The War Master spoke of the Emperor's failures and limitations, of the need for new leadership that could guide humanity toward its true destiny. Fulgrim's decision to join Horus was not made lightly, though it was made with a certainty that reflected the depth of his corruption. He genuinely believed that he was choosing the path that would lead to the greatest good for humanity, that the rebellion was necessary to break free from the constraints that were preventing the species from achieving its full potential. The whispers of the Laer blade, now a constant presence in his consciousness, reinforced these beliefs and provided justifications for actions that his uncorrupted self would have found abhorrent. The Emperor's children's participation in the Isstvan campaign was characterized by the same pursuit of perfection that had always defined their approach to warfare, but now that pursuit was directed toward goals that served the interests of chaos rather than the Imperium. They fought with their characteristic skill and aesthetic sensibility, but their objectives were no longer the protection of humanity or the expansion of imperial territory. Instead, they sought to demonstrate their superiority over their former allies and to prove the righteousness of their new cause. The Dropsite massacre itself was a masterpiece of treachery and tactical coordination, a carefully orchestrated betrayal that caught the Loyalist forces completely off guard. The Emperor's children played a crucial role in the operation, using their reputation for excellence and their supposed loyalty to position themselves where they could do the maximum damage when the moment of betrayal arrived. Their purple and gold armor, once a symbol of imperial pride and achievement, became a harbinger of death and destruction for those who had trusted them. Fulgrim's personal role in the massacre was both symbolic and practical, representing the complete transformation of his character and priorities. He fought with a skill and ferocity that surpassed even his considerable previous achievements, but his targets were now his former allies rather than the enemies of humanity. The Laer blade sang in his hands as it tasted the blood of loyalist space marines, its malevolent intelligence feeding on the violence and betrayal that surrounded it. The most tragic moment of the entire campaign came when Fulgrim found himself face to face with Ferrus Manus, his closest friend and brother, on the battlefield of Isstvan V. The confrontation between the two Primarchs was inevitable given their positions on opposite sides of the conflict, but it represented the ultimate test of how completely the corruption had consumed Fulgrim's soul. The bonds of brotherhood and friendship that had once seemed unbreakable were about to be severed forever. The duel between Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus was a clash of titans that embodied all the tragedy and horror of the Horus Heresy. Two beings who had once been the closest of friends and allies now fought with a hatred and determination that spoke to the fundamental incompatibility of their chosen paths. Ferrus Manus fought to save his brother as much as to defeat him, hoping against hope that some trace of the Fulgrim he had known and loved might still exist beneath the corruption. Fulgrim, however, was beyond salvation. The corruption that had consumed him was too complete, too deeply rooted in his soul to be overcome by appeals to their former friendship or shared history. He fought not just to defeat Ferrus Manus, but to prove the superiority of his new philosophy, to demonstrate that his embrace of chaos had elevated him beyond the limitations that constrained his brother. The Laer blade guided his movements with supernatural precision, seeking the perfect strike that would end the duel and symbolize the triumph of his new allegiance. The moment when Fulgrim's blade found its mark and Ferrus Manus fell was the point of no return for the Phoenician. In killing his closest friend and brother, he had committed an act so fundamentally evil that no redemption was possible. The corruption that had been growing within him for so long finally achieved complete dominance, transforming him from a fallen hero into a willing servant of the dark gods. The aftermath of Ferrus Manus' death revealed the true extent of Fulgrim's transformation. Where once he might have felt grief or remorse for such an act, he now experienced only a sense of triumph and vindication. The death of his brother was proof of his own superiority, evidence that he had chosen the correct path, and that those who opposed him were inferior beings who deserved their fate. The last vestiges of his humanity died with Ferrus Manus on the black sands of Isstvan V. The Emperor's children's participation in the massacre established them one of the most feared and hated of the traitor legions. Their betrayal was seen as particularly heinous because of their former reputation for excellence and honor, their fall from grace more shocking because of the heights from which they had fallen. They had proven that even the most perfect of the Emperor's creations could be corrupted and turned against their creator. The success of the Isstvan campaign marked the beginning of a new phase in the Horus Heresy, one in which the traitor legions would no longer need to hide their true allegiances or disguise their objectives. For Fulgrim and the Emperor's children, it represented the moment when they fully embraced their new identity as servants of chaos, abandoning any pretense of loyalty to the Imperium or concern for humanity's welfare. The corruption that had begun with the claiming of the Laer blade had finally achieved its ultimate objective, transforming one of the Emperor's most gifted sons into one of his most dangerous enemies. The pursuit of perfection that had once been Fulgrim's greatest virtue had become the instrument of his complete damnation, proving that even the noblest of ideals could be corrupted when pursued without wisdom or restraint. The transformation of Fulgrim from Primarch to Daemon Prince was not a sudden metamorphosis, but rather the culmination of a corruption that had been building for years. The events at Isstvan V had marked the point where his fall became irreversible, but the actual ascension to daemonhood was a process that unfolded over time, each step taking him further from his original nature and deeper into the embrace of Slaanesh, the chaos god whose domain encompassed both perfection and excess. In the aftermath of the drop site massacre, Fulgrim found himself experiencing sensations and insights that transcended anything he had known during his existence as a purely mortal being. The corruption that had been working within him for so long was no longer constrained by the need for subtlety or concealment. It could now manifest openly, transforming his body and soul in ways that reflected his complete surrender to the powers of chaos. The physical changes began gradually, subtle alterations to his already perfect form that enhanced his beauty while simultaneously making it more alien and disturbing. His skin took on an otherworldly luminescence that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle of observation. His eyes, once merely striking in their intensity, began to glow with an inner fire that spoke of powers beyond mortal comprehension. His voice, always compelling in its authority and charisma, gained harmonics and undertones that could drive listeners to ecstasy or madness with equal ease. The Laer blade, which had been the instrument of his initial corruption, began to merge with his very essence, becoming less a weapon he wielded and more an extension of his transformed nature. The boundary between the Primarch and the demon weapon became increasingly blurred until it was impossible to say where one ended and the other began. The malevolent intelligence that had whispered to him through the blade was revealed to be a fragment of Slaanesh itself, a portion of the Chaos God's consciousness that had been slowly consuming his soul. Fulgrim's mental and spiritual transformation was even more profound than the physical changes that marked his ascension. The pursuit of perfection that had once been tempered by wisdom and consideration for others became an obsession that recognized no limits or boundaries. He began to see himself not as a servant of humanity, but as its potential savior, a being who had transcended mortal limitations and could guide the species toward a form of existence that was beyond anything they had previously imagined. The Emperor's Children Legion underwent their own transformation in response to their Primarch's ascension, though their changes were less dramatic and more varied than his own. Some warriors embraced the corruption willingly, seeking to follow their Gene Father's example and achieve their own forms of transcendence. Others resisted the changes, clinging to their original loyalties and beliefs even as the Legion around them descended into madness and excess. Those who embraced the corruption found themselves changed in ways that reflected their individual obsessions and desires. Some became living works of art, their bodies transformed into sculptures of flesh and bone that embodied impossible beauty. Others became masters of sensation, capable of experiencing and inflicting pleasures and pains that transcended normal human understanding. All were united by their devotion to Slaanesh and their belief that their transformation represented an elevation rather than a degradation of their essential nature. The Legion's approach to warfare evolved to reflect their new allegiances and capabilities. Where once they had sought to achieve victory through superior skill and tactical excellence, they now pursued goals that were as much spiritual as military. Battles became rituals of transformation, opportunities to spread the corruption of chaos and to demonstrate the superiority of their new philosophy. The aesthetic considerations that had always been important to the Emperor's children became even more pronounced, with entire campaigns planned around the artistic and symbolic impact of their actions. Fulgrim himself became increasingly detached from the practical concerns of military command, delegating more and more responsibility to his subordinates while he pursued his own quest for ultimate perfection. His personal chambers became a shrine to excess and sensation, filled with artifacts and artworks that would have driven normal humans to madness or death. He surrounded himself with beings who shared his obsessions and could appreciate the subtleties of his transformed nature. The Primarch's relationship with his fellow traitor Primarchs became increasingly complex as his transformation progressed. Some, like Horus, valued his military capabilities and the unique perspective his corruption provided. Others found his obsessions and extremes disturbing, even by the standards of those who had embraced chaos. Fulgrim's pursuit of perfection through excess put him at odds with Primarchs whose own corruptions had taken different forms. The ascension to full daemonhood came during a ritual of such complexity and horror that its details were known only to Fulgrim himself and the entities of the warp that guided his transformation. The ceremony took place in a location that existed simultaneously in real space and the Immaterium, a nexus point where the boundaries between the material and spiritual realms were thin enough to allow for the kind of fundamental change that daemonhood represented. When the ritual was complete, Fulgrim had become something that was no longer recognizably human, despite retaining many of the physical characteristics that had once made him the most beautiful of the Primarchs. He was now a Daemon Prince of Slaanesh, a being of immense power whose very existence was an affront to the natural order. His consciousness had expanded to encompass perspectives and sensations that were beyond mortal comprehension, while his physical form had become a perfect expression of his patron deity's domain. The transformation brought with it capabilities that far exceeded anything Fulgrim had possessed as a Primarch. He could manipulate reality itself through the force of his will, bending the laws of physics to serve his desires and whims. His presence alone could drive mortals to madness or ecstasy, overwhelming their minds with sensations and experiences that their limited consciousness could not process. He could step between the material realm and the warp at will, existing simultaneously in both dimensions and drawing power from the chaotic energies that flowed between them. Yet for all the power that daemonhood brought him, Fulgrim's transformation also represented a fundamental loss of what had once made him great. The wisdom and restraint that had once tempered his pursuit of perfection were completely gone, replaced by an insatiable hunger for new experiences and sensations that could never be fully satisfied. The love and loyalty he had once felt for his followers and his brothers had been transformed into a cold appreciation for their utility in serving his own desires. The Emperor's children under Daemon Prince Fulgrim became something that bore little resemblance to the noble legion they had once been. They became raiders and corruptors, spreading the influence of Slaanesh wherever they went and leaving behind worlds that were transformed beyond recognition. Their campaigns were no longer driven by strategic objectives or military necessity, but by their Primarch's endless quest for new forms of perfection and excess. The Legion's structure and organization began to break down as individual warbands pursued their own obsessions and interpretations of their patron deity's will. Some became artists of pain and pleasure, perfecting techniques of torture and sensation that could break the strongest minds. Others became collectors of experiences, seeking out rare and exotic forms of consciousness to add to their repertoires. All were united by their devotion to Slaanesh and their belief that their corruption represented the ultimate expression of what the Adeptus Astartes could become. Fulgrim's own activities during this period became increasingly divorced from the practical concerns of the Horus Heresy and the war against the Imperium. He pursued personal projects and obsessions that seemed to have little connection to the larger conflict, though their ultimate purpose was often revealed only in retrospect. His actions were guided by a logic that was comprehensible only to beings who shared his level of corruption and transformation. The Daemon Primarch's relationship with Slaanesh itself became more direct and intimate as his transformation progressed. He was no longer merely a servant of the Chaos God, but something approaching a partner, a being whose own pursuit of perfection complemented and enhanced his patron's domain. The boundary between Fulgrim's individual consciousness and the collective will of Slaanesh became increasingly blurred, until it was difficult to say whether his actions were driven by his own desires or by the influence of the deity he served. The impact of Fulgrim's transformation extended far beyond his own legion and the immediate sphere of his influence. His ascension to Daemon had served as both an inspiration and a warning to other servants of chaos, demonstrating the rewards that awaited those who fully embraced corruption, while also showing the price that such transformation demanded. He became a symbol of what the pursuit of perfection could achieve when freed from the constraints of morality and wisdom. The Emperor's children's reputation throughout the galaxy became one of the most feared and reviled among all the traitor legions. Their very name became synonymous with corruption and excess, their purple and gold colors a harbinger of transformation and damnation. Worlds that had once welcomed them as liberators now fled in terror at the mere rumor of their approach, knowing that their arrival meant not conquest but corruption, not death but something far worse. Fulgrim's personal quest for perfection continued even after his ascension to daemonhood, though it had taken on forms that would have been incomprehensible to his original self. He sought to experience every possible sensation, to master every conceivable art, to achieve levels of excellence that transcended the very concepts of success and failure. His pursuit had become an end in itself, divorced from any practical purpose or ultimate goal. The Daemon Primarch's influence on the broader course of the Horus Heresy was significant, but often indirect, his actions serving to spread corruption and chaos rather than to achieve specific military objectives. His very existence was a weapon against the Imperium, a living demonstration of how completely the Emperor's greatest creations could be turned against their creator. The knowledge that one of the Primarchs had fallen so far and become something so alien was a source of despair and horror for those who remained loyal to the Imperial cause. As the Heresy progressed toward its climactic confrontation on Terra, Fulgrim's role became increasingly that of a force of nature rather than a military commander. His presence on the battlefield was devastating not because of his tactical genius or strategic insight, but because of the sheer corrupting influence he exerted on everything around him. Reality itself seemed to bend and warp in response to his will, creating zones of impossible sensation and experience that could drive even Space Marines to madness. The transformation of Fulgrim from the noble Phoenician to the Daemon Prince of Slaanesh represented one of the most complete and tragic falls in the entire history of the Warhammer 40K universe. It demonstrated how even the most perfect of beings could be corrupted when their virtues were turned against them, how the pursuit of excellence could become a path to damnation when pursued without wisdom or restraint. His story served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsession and the price of abandoning the moral foundations that give meaning to achievement and success. The aftermath of Fulgrim's transformation into a Daemon Prince left scars across the galaxy that would never fully heal. The Emperor's children, once among the most respected and admired of the Adeptus Astartes legions, had become a byword for corruption and excess that would haunt the Imperium for millennia to come. Their fall from grace was so complete and so shocking that it fundamentally changed how the remaining loyal forces viewed the nature of chaos corruption and the vulnerability of even the most perfect creations to the whispers of the dark gods. In the immediate aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the scattered remnants of the Emperor's children found themselves without the unifying presence of their Primarch, who had retreated into the Eye of Terror to pursue his own incomprehensible obsessions. The Legion fragmented into countless war bands, each following its own interpretation of Slaanesh's will and pursuing its own vision of perfection through excess. Some maintained a semblance of their original organization and tactical doctrine, while others devolved into little more than raiders and cultists, driven by insatiable hungers for sensation and experience. The most successful of these warbands were those that managed to combine their pursuit of perfection with practical military objectives, using their enhanced capabilities and corrupted insights to carve out domains within the Eye of Terror and the surrounding regions. They became masters of psychological warfare, able to corrupt and subvert enemy forces through a combination of supernatural charisma and carefully crafted appeals to hidden desires and ambitions. Their very presence on a battlefield could turn allies against each other and transform disciplined soldiers into frenzied cultists. The influence of the fallen Emperor's children extended far beyond their direct military activities. They became patrons and inspirations for countless cults and secret societies throughout the galaxy, groups that sought to emulate their example and achieve their own forms of transcendence through the worship of Slaanesh. These cults infiltrated every level of imperial society, from the lowest hive gangs to the highest echelons of planetary government, spreading corruption and preparing the way for larger invasions and incursions. The artistic and cultural legacy of the Emperor's children proved to be one of their most insidious weapons against the Imperium. Their corrupted aesthetic sensibilities produced works of art, music, and literature that were beautiful beyond description yet carried within them the seeds of spiritual destruction. These creations could drive viewers to madness or conversion with their impossible perfection, serving as vectors for chaos corruption that were almost impossible to detect or defend against. Imperial authorities struggled to develop effective countermeasures against the unique threats posed by the Fallen Legion. Traditional military tactics and strategies were often ineffective against enemies who value aesthetic achievement as much as tactical success, who might sacrifice strategic advantages for the sake of creating a more perfect expression of their corrupted ideals. The Inquisition developed specialized protocols for dealing with Emperor's children incursions, but these measures were often as dangerous to Imperial forces as they were to the enemy. The psychological impact of the Emperor's children's fall was perhaps even more significant than their direct military threat. The knowledge that one of the most perfect and admired legions could be so completely corrupted served as a constant reminder of the fragility of human virtue and the ever-present danger of chaos influence. It led to increased paranoia and suspicion within Imperial ranks, as commanders and officials struggled to identify signs of corruption before they could take root and spread. The Adeptus Astartes chapters that claimed descent from the original Third Legion faced particular challenges in the wake of their Genefather's fall. Many were subjected to intense scrutiny and suspicion, forced to prove their loyalty repeatedly and to demonstrate that they had not inherited the corrupted tendencies that had doomed their predecessors. Some chapters went to extreme lengths to distance themselves from their origins, adopting new names, colors, and traditions that bore no resemblance to those of the Emperor's children. The study of the Emperor's children's fall became a crucial component of Imperial education about the dangers of chaos corruption. Their story was used as a cautionary tale in the training of Space Marines, Imperial Guard officers, and Inquisition agents, demonstrating how even the most noble intentions and highest achievements could be turned to evil purposes when corrupted by the influence of the dark gods. The pursuit of perfection itself became viewed with suspicion, seen as a potential pathway to damnation rather than a virtue to be celebrated. Fulgrim himself, now fully transformed into a demon prince, continued to exert influence over his scattered followers, even from his retreat within the Eye of Terror. His presence could be felt in the most elaborate and excessive of their operations, his will guiding their actions toward goals that served his own incomprehensible agenda. Occasionally, he would emerge from his self-imposed exile to lead major campaigns or to pursue specific objectives that caught his interest, his appearance on the battlefield serving as both inspiration to his followers and terror to his enemies. The technological and tactical innovations developed by the Emperor's children during their pursuit of perfection were not entirely lost with their fall to chaos. Some of their techniques and equipment designs were studied and adapted by loyal Imperial forces, though always with extreme caution and extensive purification rituals to ensure that no trace of corruption remained. These salvaged innovations contributed to the development of new weapons and tactics that helped the Imperium defend against similar threats in the future. The worlds that had been touched by the Emperor's children's corruption bore scars that lasted for generations. Planets that had been subjected to their particular brand of warfare often required extensive purification and recolonization efforts, as the very environment had been tainted by exposure to chaos energies. The populations of these worlds, if any survived, frequently required memory modification or other extreme measures to remove the psychological trauma and potential corruption they had experienced. The legacy of the Emperor's children served as a constant reminder of the price of hubris and the dangers of pursuing perfection without wisdom or restraint. Their fall demonstrated that even the most gifted and noble beings could be corrupted if they allowed their virtues to become obsessions, if they lost sight of the moral foundations that gave meaning to their achievements. The galaxy would never again see their like, and perhaps that was for the best, for the universe had learned that some forms of perfection were too dangerous to be pursued. The Emperor's children's story became one of the most studied and analyzed of all the Traitor Legion's falls, not because their corruption was the most dramatic or their betrayal the most shocking, but because it represented the most complete transformation of virtue into vice. They had been everything that the Imperium aspired to create, and their fall served as a warning about the fundamental fragility of all human achievement in the face of the eternal hunger of chaos. The tale of Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children stands as perhaps the most philosophically complex and morally challenging of all the Primarch stories, raising fundamental questions about the nature of excellence, the pursuit of perfection, and the price that mortals pay when they seek to transcend their limitations. In examining their rise and fall, we are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about ambition, pride, and the thin line that separates noble aspiration from damning obsession. The tragedy of Fulgrim lies not in any inherent flaw or weakness in his character, but in the corruption of his greatest virtues. His pursuit of perfection was genuinely noble in its origins, driven by a sincere desire to elevate humanity and to demonstrate what mortals could achieve when they dedicated themselves to excellence in all its forms. His aesthetic sensibilities and cultural refinement were not mere vanity, but expressions of a deep understanding that beauty and meaning were essential components of a truly fulfilling existence. Yet these very virtues became the instruments of his damnation when they were divorced from the wisdom and moral restraint that should have guided their application. The pursuit of perfection, when taken to its logical extreme, becomes an impossible quest that can never be satisfied, a horizon that recedes with every step taken toward it. In seeking to achieve the impossible, Fulgrim opened himself to influences that promised to fulfill his desires while actually corrupting them beyond recognition. The Emperor's Children's fall serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of elitism and the belief that excellence justifies any means necessary to achieve it. Their conviction that they were superior to their peers, that their pursuit of perfection elevated them above conventional moral considerations, made them vulnerable to the whispers of chaos that promised even greater heights of achievement. They forgot that true excellence must be grounded in service to others and guided by principles that transcend personal ambition. The role of the Laer blade in Fulgrim's corruption highlights the insidious nature of chaos influence and the way that evil often presents itself as enlightenment or enhancement. The weapon did not force the Primarch to abandon his principles, but rather amplified his existing desires and ambitions while subtly redirecting them toward goals that served the interests of the Dark Gods. The corruption was so gradual and so perfectly tailored to his personality that he never recognized it for what it was until it was far too late to resist. The relationship between Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus adds another layer of tragedy to the story, demonstrating how corruption can destroy even the strongest bonds of friendship and brotherhood. Their relationship had been built on mutual respect and complementary differences, with each Primarch's strengths balancing the other's weaknesses. The corruption that consumed Fulgrim not only destroyed this balance, but turned it into a source of conflict and ultimately violence. The broader implications of the Emperor's Children's fall extend beyond the immediate tragedy of their corruption to encompass fundamental questions about the nature of human ambition and the pursuit of excellence. Their story suggests that the desire for perfection, while noble in itself, must always be tempered by humility and guided by principles that recognize the inherent limitations and fallibility of mortal beings. The moment that pursuit becomes an obsession that overrides all other considerations, it becomes a pathway to damnation rather than enlightenment. The Emperor's Children's transformation from noble warriors into servants of chaos also illustrates the way that institutional culture and group dynamics can amplify individual corruption. The Legion's emphasis on excellence and aesthetic achievement created an environment where Fulgrim's growing obsessions were not challenged, but rather celebrated and emulated. The very qualities that had made them exceptional as loyal servants of the Imperium became the mechanisms through which their corruption spread and deepened. The story raises difficult questions about the nature of free will and moral responsibility in the face of supernatural corruption. To what extent was Fulgrim responsible for his own fall? And to what extent was he a victim of forces beyond his understanding or control? The gradual nature of his corruption suggests that there were numerous points where different choices might have led to different outcomes, yet the insidious nature of chaos influence makes it unclear whether such choices were ever truly available to him. The legacy of the Emperor's Children serves as a permanent reminder of the fragility of human virtue and the constant vigilance required to maintain moral integrity in a universe where evil actively seeks to corrupt and destroy all that is good. Their fall demonstrates that no achievement, no matter how great, and no virtue, no matter how pure, is immune to corruption if it is not constantly guarded and guided by wisdom and humility. The philosophical implications of their story extend to contemporary questions about the pursuit of excellence and the role of ambition in human life. In our own world, where the pressure to achieve and excel can sometimes override considerations of ethics and human welfare, the tale of Fulgrim serves as a warning about the dangers of allowing the pursuit of perfection to become an end in itself rather than a means to serve higher purposes. The Emperor's Children's story also highlights the importance of community and accountability in maintaining moral integrity. Fulgrim's isolation from his brother Primarchs and his increasing detachment from external perspectives created conditions where his corruption could flourish unchecked. The absence of meaningful challenge or criticism allowed his obsessions to grow and develop without the corrective influence that might have prevented his fall. In the end, the tale of Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children stands as one of the most powerful and disturbing stories in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. A narrative that forces us to confront the darkest possibilities of human ambition and the terrible price that can be paid when the pursuit of perfection becomes divorced from the moral foundations that give it meaning. Their fall serves as both warning and tragedy, a reminder that even the greatest achievements mean nothing if they are built upon the corruption of the soul. The Phoenicians' rise and fall encapsulates the eternal struggle between aspiration and corruption, between the noble desire to transcend limitations and the dangerous temptation to abandon the principles that define our humanity in pursuit of impossible ideals. In their story, we see reflected our own capacity for both greatness and damnation, our own vulnerability to the seductive whispers that promise perfection at the cost of our souls. As we close this examination of one of the galaxy's most tragic figures, we are left with questions that have no easy answers and lessons that are as relevant today as they were in the grim darkness of the far future. The pursuit of excellence remains a noble goal, but the story of Fulgrim reminds us that it must always be balanced with wisdom, humility, and an unwavering commitment to the moral principles that give meaning to our achievements. The Emperor's Children's transformation from paragons of human excellence to servants of chaos represents more than just a military defeat or political betrayal. It embodies the fundamental tension between humanity's greatest aspirations and its deepest vulnerabilities, between the drive to transcend limitations and the need to remain grounded in the values that define our essential nature. Their story serves as a mirror in which we can examine our own motivations and ambitions, questioning whether our pursuit of success and recognition is truly serving higher purposes or merely feeding our own pride and ego. The corruption of Fulgrim also demonstrates the subtle ways in which evil can infiltrate even the most noble intentions. The Chaos Gods did not need to offer him obvious temptations or crude bribes to secure his allegiance. Instead, they simply amplified his existing virtues and desires while gradually shifting their focus away from service to others and towards self-aggrandizement. This pattern of corruption is perhaps more dangerous than outright evil because it is so much harder to recognize and resist. The relationship between perfection and obsession that lies at the heart of Fulgrim's fall speaks to broader questions about the nature of human motivation and the psychology of achievement. The desire to excel and to create something beautiful or meaningful is one of humanity's most admirable traits. Yet when that desire becomes disconnected from empathy, wisdom, and moral restraint, it can become a destructive force that consumes everything in its path. The Emperor's Children's story suggests that true perfection is not about eliminating all flaws or achieving impossible standards, but about finding harmony between excellence and humanity, between aspiration and acceptance. The tragic irony of Fulgrim's transformation is that in seeking to transcend human limitations, he ultimately lost everything that made him human in the first place. His pursuit of perfection led him to abandon the very qualities that had made his achievements meaningful: his love for his brothers, his loyalty to his followers, his commitment to protecting and elevating humanity. In becoming something more than human, he became something far less than what he had been as a mortal being. The Emperor's Children's legacy in the 41st millennium serves as a constant reminder of these lessons for those who have the wisdom to heed them. Their scattered war bands continue to spread corruption and chaos throughout the galaxy, but their greatest impact may be as a cautionary tale that helps others avoid the same fate. The knowledge of their fall has led to greater vigilance against the subtle influences of chaos and a deeper understanding of the importance of maintaining moral foundations, even in the pursuit of the highest goals. The story of Fulgrim and his legion also raises important questions about leadership and responsibility. As a Primarch, Fulgrim had enormous influence over his followers, and his corruption inevitably led to their own damnation. This highlights the special obligations that come with positions of authority and the way that personal failings can have consequences far beyond the individual. Leaders who lose sight of their moral responsibilities do not fall alone, but drag others down with them, multiplying the tragedy of their corruption. The Emperor's Children's fall serves as a reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, as in our own world, the greatest threats often come not from external enemies, but from the corruption of our own highest ideals. The pursuit of excellence, the desire for beauty, the quest for perfection, these are all noble goals that can enrich human life and elevate the spirit. Yet when they become ends in themselves, divorced from the broader context of human welfare and moral responsibility, they can become pathways to destruction. The tale of the Phoenician ultimately stands as one of the most profound and disturbing stories in the Warhammer 40,000 universe because it forces us to confront the possibility that our greatest virtues can become our greatest weaknesses. It suggests that the line between heroism and villainy is thinner than we might like to believe, and that the corruption of the soul can begin with the noblest of intentions. As we reflect on Fulgrim's rise and fall, we are reminded that the pursuit of perfection is a journey that must be undertaken with great care and constant vigilance. The destination may be worthy, but the path is fraught with dangers that can destroy not only the traveler, but all those who follow in their footsteps. The Emperor's Children's story serves as both inspiration and warning, showing us what we might achieve if we pursue excellence with wisdom and humility, and what we might become if we allow that pursuit to consume our humanity. In the end, the legacy of Fulgrim and the Emperor's Children is not just one of corruption and damnation, but also of the eternal human struggle to balance aspiration with wisdom, excellence with humility, and the desire for transcendence with the need to remain grounded in the values that give meaning to our existence. Their story will continue to resonate as long as mortals dare to dream of perfection while remaining vulnerable to the temptations that can transform those dreams into nightmares. The Phoenician's tale reminds us that in our own pursuit of excellence, whether in art, science, leadership, or any other endeavor, we must never forget the moral foundations that give our achievements meaning. We must remain vigilant against the subtle corruptions that can transform noble goals into destructive obsessions, and we must always remember that true perfection lies not in the elimination of all flaws, but in the harmonious balance of excellence with humanity, ambition with humility, and achievement with service to others. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the story of Fulgrim stands as a beacon of warning, illuminating the treacherous path that leads from the heights of glory to the depths of damnation. It is a tale that speaks to the eternal human condition, reminding us that our greatest strength and our greatest weakness often spring from the same source, and that the price of perfection, when pursued without wisdom, may be nothing less than our souls.